So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Trustee Learning Programme session from Getting On Board. Today we're talking about effective relationships between staff and trustees, and I think it's going to be a completely fascinating discussion. We've got Fran here, who's chairing our panel, and we've got 5 brilliant panellists. Really looking forward to this conversation. It's a topic that never goes away. So we're hoping to hear some more stories, and we're hoping also to think about preventative measures, how we can prevent ourselves getting into hot water when it comes to staff-trustee relations. So a little bit of housekeeping from me first. You will have seen as you've come in that the session is being recorded. We will send you the recording afterwards. There are no slides from this session, so there's no slides to be shared. Please be aware that the recording does include the chat, so anything you post in the chat will be on the recording. If you want to ask a question and you want it to be anonymous, please send it to me, Penny, directly, and I will read it out without your name. The session will also eventually go on to YouTube, although that recording will be without the chat. You've been muted as you've come into the call. Please stay unmuted. That helps keep the sound nice and clear for everybody. Closed captions have been enabled at our end. So if you'd like to use the subtitles, you need to press your CC or closed caption button on your device. Please absolutely feel free to use the chat to ask questions, to share reflections. We'd really love to hear from you. Please keep your comments respectful. And as I said earlier, also be aware that this is in the public domain. And then a giant thank you to our sponsors, Russell Cook. It's thanks to them that this session and many others in our programme is completely free of charge. And we also have Carla here today. So we've got not just their financial support, but also we've got Carla here in person sharing her experiences on this topic. So thank you. And I'm going to pass over to Fran, who's chairing the session.
Thank you so much, Penny. Really excited to be here today. Such an exciting topic to be getting a deep dive into. And from the panel, we've got a real wealth and diversity of experience. So thank you all for coming along this afternoon. So my first question is, if you could go back in time and advise your younger, new trustee self about how to sustain effective board and staff relationships, what advice would you give and why? And perhaps you could just give us a little bit of an intro at the beginning of your answer. That would be brilliant. So I'll start with Sarah Martin, please.
Thanks so much, Fran, and lovely to see everyone. It's really great to be here. I am really excited to answer this question because I joined the board at Basis Yorkshire when I was only 26, which was pretty young for a trustee. I think the average age is much older than that. And I think as a younger person, I was really intimidated by not only the board, but also how to manage good relationships with the staff team. But what I learned in that process through some difficult conversations as well as the easy ones was that relationship management is the same wherever you go, and it's the same wherever and whoever you're talking to. And fundamentally that we're all just people. And if you have clear communication and you're able to be honest about the difficulties that you might be having, but also encourage honesty that with the other staff as well, then you're going to get a really good and trusting relationship. And that's absolutely vital. I think the other thing that I think is useful to remember, and I still remember this now, is that board meetings happen really infrequently. And at the end of the day, it's really difficult to manage and develop a great relationship if you're only meeting somebody maybe for, a couple of hours every quarter. So making time to have good developmental meetings in between the board meetings and the more formal committees that you might have can really pay dividends in the long term. And I think to conclude, as chair in kind of a board and working relationships, it's really, really important that nothing in the meeting should ever be new to staff members joining. It shouldn't ever be sprung on them or kind of any kind of surprise. So having the time to prep meetings properly and have good agendas so that everyone feels informed means that people can perform to the best of their ability when they may be under some scrutiny too.
A lot of really important points there. Clear communication, honesty, and I love that last point you made about not springing things on your senior staff. Preparation really helps with building those bridges, doesn't it? So thank you. And Sarah, do you just want to say a little bit about your current, don't worry, that's fine, your current kind of perspectives? I know you've got a couple.
Yeah, so I joined the panel really with two different perspectives. So I'm chair of the Board of Trustees at Basis Yorkshire, which is a charity based in Leeds supporting sex workers and children that have experienced exploitation. And I've been chair now for a couple of years, and I've been on the board for a number of years too. But I also joined the panel as a senior fundraiser of Head of Philanthropy at ActionAid. So I have a great relationship with the board because they're able to open networks and open doors for us. But it does give me a different perspective because I'm the one trying to manage the relationship with them with this hat on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'm sure the fact that you liaise with the board in your senior role at ActionAid gives you some insight when you put your trustee hat on, how to nurture those relationships with staff. Thank you. Can I ask you, Graham, what your thoughts are on that question, please?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again for the invite and for joining the session. I'm Graham Atkinson. I work for Atkinson HR Consulting. We're a strategic HR consultancy. I suppose the perspectives I'm bringing are similar. I'm currently chair of governors at a school. I've also been on a couple of different trustee boards, as well as working in the voluntary sector for the vast majority of my kind of career in kind of some senior roles, most recently in interim chief exec roles. Actually, I think I'd probably mirror a couple of the things that Sarah's said there. I think actually just the fundamentals of great relationship management. Again, if I could tell my younger self anything, it would be, just have that openness in your relationships. When there's something that frustrates you, have the conversation early. In my experience, the best relationships between trustees and staff are when you're really open about expectations, when you talk about your roles, when you talk about, right, what works for you in terms of how often we meet and when we meet and how we do that. And also, there will be frustrations in that relationship. So again, the great relationships I see in kind of charity governance are when people are able to say early. And again, I think that's something that takes you time to build the confidence, doesn't it? To be able to kind of challenge early, or when you've got frustrations, to raise that so it avoids it becoming a bigger problem. I think the only other thing I would say that the bit of advice I would give my earlier self was I should have joined a board earlier, actually, because I think when I'd worked in senior roles in charities, and sometimes, used to get a little bit frustrated with trustees, and you used to think, we had this conversation 9 months ago, or I brought a paper to the board a year ago, and you're asking me the same question. And I think it was only probably really once I'd become a charity trustee and had the chance to kind of wear a different hat and get the benefit of a different perspective that I thought, actually, I need to raise my game here. I need to be better at retelling the story. I need to really think about how I engage more outside of meetings with trustees. And obviously, I know it's trustees on this call, but if there are staff in the, for staff in the organisations where you're working, I would really encourage them to take on trustee roles, because I think that benefit of another perspective certainly really helped me. So that was my advice to me 20 years ago, Fran.
I love that. And there were lots of nods at the point where you were talking about joining earlier. I know certainly when I was a CEO, I didn't contemplate becoming a trustee at that time, but I'm sure it gives you that extra empathy, doesn't it? And understanding the perspective of the other side, so to speak. So thank you so much. And you talked about picking up on problems when they're small. We see, don't we, often the problem is escalated and then suddenly we're trying to find a way to resolve it. So having those open conversations, really, really useful advice there. Thank you. Kieran, would you like to share your thoughts?
Hi, yes, thanks, Fran. Hi, everyone. And thanks so much for having me here on the panel. My name is Kieran, and I am the co-founder and CEO of an organization called Girl Dreamer. So I have a few different perspectives as well, because I sit on the board of my own organization. I sat on the board of a national board, and I currently also chair the board of a small charity. So very different perspectives in that sense. So I think for my younger self, for me, I was very much like the world of trustees was very unknown to me. I always say, like, my journey, even starting an organization, was accidental. So the one into trusteeship was completely accidental. And so I think I wish I had really done a lot more, maybe learning about what it means to actually be a trustee in terms of two things. One, the responsibilities and the obligations of the board, but also what representation can mean when you sit on a board. And for me, I was 20 something and then went straight onto a national board. And I don't think I quite grasped what that level of representation or that level of responsibility could mean. And I wish maybe I'd had conversations at that time with people who were in a similar space so that I could really best know how to utilize the space I was about to be in before everything just starts unfolding. Because once you, as once you go into those meetings and it just starts, you're like, oh my goodness. And now it's really real. I also think that something I think I learned very quickly as well is, regardless of the size of the board, sometimes what a board can think is with all good intention, can think is the best thing for the organization and the staff means something different to the staff for who that's for. So I always see, and I still do, is that thing of the board hopes and plans and executes things on behalf of staff, but what that means to the board and what that means to the staff themselves can be sometimes two different things. And that's when I think things can go a little wrong. So there's a lot of learning around expectations and responsibility, and also just general learnings and knowledge. And something I've got better at, but I wish I did more, was to ask questions. Because there's nothing worse than feeling lost in the middle of a meeting, but then feeling a little too nervous or scared to just actually put your hand up and say, I have no idea what that meant. And I definitely spent the first part of my trustee journey not doing that. And I think that can actually potentially add to the detriment of staff relationships and board thing, because if you don't know yourself what's going on entirely in that meeting, it's like, how best can you use the position you're in? So now I'm a bit too good at just being like, this every
That's great.
But
great.
Yeah, I think that's me.
There's a lot of wisdom there. Thank you, Kieran. I wonder whether you just expand a little bit on the point you made around when a board makes a decision and it can mean something different to the staff. Just say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So sometimes it's like I found board goes, oh, we should, I don't know, roll out this piece of work around X thing that's going to help our organization in this way, diversity or just something like that's the thing. And again, that intention is there to make the organization better, to better serve the organization. And so it's all done with good intention. However, what the outcome of that means for the board is sometimes different to what it actually means for the staff members it involves, because their version of what the outcome of that is can be different to what the board's outcome of that very same piece of work is. And that's where I think sometimes lines get crossed in communication, kind of, they intersect in interesting ways.
Excellent, thank you. And I was really interested to hear about, your feelings when you joined when you were younger, that possibly maybe a bit of a lack of psychological safety in that larger, more senior group, and the inability perhaps, or the lack of confidence to be able to speak up. Do you think there's little tweaks we could be making generally to smooth the way and make it more inclusive from the start?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, it cut out slightly there, but I think I got the question. Can you still hear me? Oh,
yes, can hear you well.
Oh, okay. Could you repeat the last part? I think that's what.
Yes, see if I can remember what I said. Oh, yes. So you kind of identified how it felt coming in as a young trustee, and some of the perhaps inhibitions you might have felt to challenge or ask questions. I'm wondering if you have any ideas about what we can do for new younger trustees coming in to make that a more inclusive, psychologically safe space from the start, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think at one point I did a benefit from a sort of prep session for trusteeship. So like a kind of mock meeting of this is what the format is, and this is generally what happens. Again, like when it's really unfamiliar, having, you know, a chair, and then you kind of look around and go, oh, okay, this one person seems to govern, or people say yes, chair, and I'm like, oh my God, who is that person? So all of these small nuances about how, I suppose, how it plays out, just even understanding the structure is really important before even diving into what's on the agenda. This is how generally it goes. This is how much time you spend on this. This is a chair. This is how people address them. This is, you know, essentially there's no level of specific contribution you contribute, but just to really understand the know-how, especially when you're first starting, and then have the ability to maybe have regular check-ins with the chair then, or the CEO, just to be like, this is how I feel like it's going for me. There's areas I'd like to speak on. So not necessarily coaching, but just a bit of additional support, especially in those early ones, just until you're comfortable enough to find your own feet. I think that even in an informal space is really, really helpful, because then it builds your sense of safety in that space, I think.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Over to you, Carla. What are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, hi. As Penny mentioned, I'm Carla. I'm one of the lawyers in the charity team at Russell Cook, but my background is as an employment lawyer. Like everyone else, I'm also a chair of a small charity, and I've been a trustee of a couple of other smaller charities as well in the past. Actually, before I did law, my first degree was in music and English lit, and the first encounter that I had with being a trustee was well before I did anything to do with charity law. It was someone that I'd done a music course with, who'd set up a small music charity in Scotland. I became a trustee, didn't understand anything about Scots charity law. Still don't know much about it, so don't ask me about that if you want to know. But yeah, it was a lot of what Kieran was saying I completely agree with, thinking back to that. And I suppose the power of hindsight, now that, you know, I am advising charities, and because I mainly deal with kind of people issues, I'm quite often seeing, unfortunately, situations where the relationships have become strained or difficult, or even sometimes completely broken down. And I think, you know, boring and lawyery as it sounds, I think actually the importance of having a really clear understanding on the part of the board and the staff about responsibilities and about who does what is so important, because I see it going both ways. Sometimes I see strain and pressure in the relationship because particularly senior staff feel that toes are being stepped on, that the board's overstepping into a kind of operational space, taking decisions, not involving senior managers, or, you know, going beyond what their remit is. Conversely, sometimes in smaller charities, I see staff thinking that the trustees aren't pulling their weight enough, actually. And they expect trustees to be doing some fundraising, doing some volunteering, not just turning up. They just turn up to board meetings and that kind of thing. So I think it's really, really, really important, not just on a one-off basis, but on a regular basis, when you're getting new trustees, when you're getting new members of staff, particularly if it's people that haven't been involved in charities before, to set out those responsibilities really clearly. And also things like, you know, we use terms like schemes of delegation or, you know, authority and that kind of thing. But what we really mean is, what is it okay for you to do without the authorization of the board, or without talking to the board, without coming back to us? And when do we want you to come and tell us first, or perhaps even actually wait to get the okay from the board? And I think, you know, having that really clear and ideally kind of written down so everyone knows where they stand, if you do that, it will avoid so many, you know, situations where people get confused or feel under attack or feel that they were just trying to do the right thing, and now the board is suddenly saying you've overstepped your authority or something. So yeah, I think that would definitely be, thinking back to my younger self coming into it a lot like Kieran, just kind of slipping into it, just being like, oh, that sounds good, sounds interesting, but not actually really knowing what I was exactly getting into and what the expectations were. I think that could have made a really big difference.
Yeah, I think that's quite common, isn't it? A lot of goodwill and passion for a cause. So people kind of agree to become a trustee, and perhaps all the T's and the I's dotted aren't really explained to start with. So getting that really clear understanding from the start. It sounds like there's two aspects you feel are really important, the legal side of things, and then there's kind of the culture piece, the needs, dependent upon the size of the charity. And I'm wondering, do you think it's important when you're setting out those expectations at the start that you involve the senior staff in those discussions or not?
Yeah, I mean, coming back to what Sarah said, I think that open communication is the key to everything. And you know, that idea of not having anything on the agenda that the staff shouldn't, you know, be aware of, senior staff in particular, obviously, if you're in a larger organization. I think that kind of goes for everything, really. You don't want senior staff to feel surprised by something or under attack or bombarded by something. So I think, yeah, I mean, we know that ultimately the trustees have to make the final decision about those big strategic decisions and the big matters, but that doesn't mean that you don't involve the staff. I think the opposite. You get buy-in. You want to all be going in the same direction and all be on the same page.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Sarah G. What's your thoughts?
So just to put me in context, I'm a chief executive of a charitable foundation at the moment, and I've been a trustee on and off for many years, and I currently do board effectiveness work. And I'm not a trustee. I'm trying to become a trustee again right at the moment. Application went in today. But one of my key areas of interest is this relationship between the senior staff and the board. And a couple of times, and Graham and I met when I was working in the Students' Union world, and I spent quite a lot of time explaining to the directors in the organisation what the benefit of the board was, particularly when 75% of them are under 25, are only there for a year, and are very challenging in the way that they approach things. And if people have come out of the commercial sector to work in a charity, it can often be difficult for senior staff to kind of see, well, normally I can just get on with things. Why would I need to take that through the board? So I've been working a little bit and having conversations. That's why I was really keen to be part of this panel with people about how do we induct and support senior staff to be effective in the board working relationship. And I ideally wish I'd known when I started being a trustee that senior staff and staff in the wider organisation may not know what the role of the board is, may not be aware of the conversations and the decision making. And sometimes it can feel like it comes down from the board. And as Carla was saying, that no one's really thought about what effect it's going to have on the staff. And so just having that transparency and that awareness of the board is a beneficial body. You need to take time as a senior team to build those relationships. I think there is a really good point that came out about when is it okay for staff to talk to the board? And kind of what are those formal routes? I think somebody popped a question in the chat about that actually, and I think having some clarity around that is really helpful. My biggest takeaway from when I first became a trustee was how important induction was. And actually I didn't realise that very first trustee role I had when I was also in my mid-20s, as Sarah was, I was supported through a programme that meant I got training and induction on trusteeship. I got given this really good crib sheet on what questions to go and ask the charity that I was joining, and some ideas for how to get into things. And I didn't realise until so much later that that's not the norm. That actually, because there's 160,000 of us as charities, we're all doing it in slightly different ways, and we don't necessarily know how to go about that. So making sure that you as a board, as a board member, are asking about induction, and not in a demanding way, but in a really the information, the knowledge I want to learn. And the other thing I learned the hard way was I'd been a trustee in a couple of organisations, and I walked into a third and I kind of thought I knew what it was all about, and I managed to rub up pretty much every member of staff the wrong way, and the treasurer, and then spent kind of the rest of my first year trying to make up that ground.
No.
And I was really fortunate they were gracious and let me, because I think I ate a lot of humble pie. But the damage I could have caused in that relationship, in that belief, in that board staff dynamic was huge. And I was kind of quite disappointed in myself. And I guess my message back to that person is be apologetic. And if you really care, it will come good. Because I kind of beat myself up a huge amount in that first year then.
So that's such a refreshing perspective to hear, Sarah. You know, apologising can undo a lot of damage, can't it? Because trust can take a lot of work to build, doesn't take a lot to kind of be damaged. And I love the focus on the education piece for the staff, because I've worked in organisations where, you know, some of the staff, the narrative around the trustees will be a kind of inconvenience, this hierarchical institution that, you know, makes decisions but don't necessarily know much about the charity. So really helping them understand the benefits and how to optimise that relationship from their, you know, point as well. Empowering the staff, I think, is really key. So thank you ever so much. So we'll move on to number 2. And thank you for the comments. I know there's a question or two appearing, which Penny will draw out when we've just finished a couple more questions. So thanks for those. Keep the comments or questions coming if you think of things as we go. Thinking back to a time when relationships turned sour between the board and the staff, and somebody mentioned earlier about picking up on problems when they're little. What were the early warning signs? I'm going to start with Kieran, please. I know you've been a trustee of small and large charities, so likely to have come across this situation.
Yeah, it's a really great question. Early warning signs. I think for me, some of those early warning signs are a lot to do around maybe miscommunication or just not effective communication. I think when staff are, again, it's what I said earlier, under the impression that something in the organization is being done for X reason or for X outcome, and when it's actually, it starts moving on the board side and staff start going, oh, I didn't. And then those questions start coming in about, oh, is this what, you know, this piece of work, or is this the direction that we take? When those questions start to come about that, you know, earlier agreed things start to pop up and it suddenly becomes unclear very early on. For me, I think that's when I've had experience of noticing that, oh, okay, it appeared everybody was on the same page at the start. But now it's becoming very clear that it's not. And if it's not clear now, when things haven't even begun and are not improving, there's a good chance it's going to become more unclear as it starts to unfold. And that, I think, is exactly what starts to happen. So I think, and then the board being able to maybe just stop at that point and readdress that, have those conversations early on and pick out what possible points of miscommunication, what are the questions that the staff have about this thing, because again, if we carry on without addressing that, things could unfold in a way that nobody expected. So yeah, that I think now double and triple checking things to ensure that, you know, what is being done and what is being said is what is actually being received is a really important process in the very, very early stages. And I think, you know, we've got a chance at catching those things and realigning, because a lot of the time I've noticed it's, again, intention and alignment is there. Sometimes just the ways of going about it, or overlooking things, or different people's perspectives and ways of reaching decisions and outcomes all start to come into play. And obviously when you've got a board size of X amount of people and a staff size of X amount of people, sometimes just unnaturally things will cross in ways that no one anticipates at the beginning.
There's something there isn't there about the intention in the communication. And then, as you said, checking to see how it's been received. And so the warning sign for you was when you could hear that people weren't on the same page. And at that point, need to go back, do some more consultation, kind of correct at that point and move on. Thank you. Carla, I was wondering what you thought from the perspective of advising charities, what you've seen as some of the early warning signs.
Yeah, I mean, as an advisor, I think it's probably fair to say that I sometimes feel that people haven't picked up on the early warning signs and have let things go a bit far. And by the time it gets to me, I'm often looking back and, again, hindsight is a wonderful thing. It's easy for me to sit there and look at a stream of, correspondence or something and pinpoint like, oh, that's when I wish you'd come to me. I think for trustees, one of the things that I see as a common factor that is a kind of early warning sign that something's not right is staff suddenly wanting everything to be in writing, a request for things to be formal, a shift in the tone of your communication. Please, can you put that in writing to me? I don't want to meet with you. I'd prefer you to send me an email. It's a really easy early warning sign that something's gone a bit wrong with the trust, that there's some erosion. And I think if you can pick up on that and just, obviously, there might be a really good reason why someone wants something in writing, wants a record of something. But I think in a lot of cases, that can be a really early signal that something's gone a little bit wrong and there's a bit of a breakdown of trust there. So I would say, as a kind of very high level, broad kind of warning sign, that's when I think sometimes I can see that, at that point, there needs to be a bit of work to be done to sit down. And I think, again, it's a kind of sitting down and having a chat. If you've got someone on the board that is a trusted person, it might be someone who's been on the board for a bit longer or has a particularly kind of good relationship with, let's say, chief exec or member of staff. It can be really good to kind of involve that person, a trusted kind of almost, not quite mediator, but a trusted person to kind of facilitate the conversation. And you all just kind of come together and go, yeah, that's fine. I'll confirm it in an email, but let's just have a chat first and then I'll follow up in writing.
That's such great advice. Sarah, I was wondering from your dual perspective of senior staff member and trustee, would you like to add anything to the warning signs you've seen?
Sure. I think from the trustee perspective, I am really lucky that I don't think the relationships have ever really been sour at Basis Yorkshire. I think we've always been lucky that things have gone really well. But quite a lot of the measures that we've put in place have definitely helped that. And that is things like discussing our risk appetite. I think quite a lot of relationships can decline because it may feel like staff are being asked for something that they can't deliver, or asking something of the board that the board can't deliver. And I think being able to talk openly about risk is really important. And from my perspective as well, a lot of discussions between staff members of any size charity and the board quite often are about money, about can we buy, can we spend, or have you achieved X target or whatever, and making sure that the bottom line is in the green and where we need it to be. And I think from my perspective as a trustee, it's my role to make sure that, and the board's responsibility really, to make sure that they're spending as much money as possible, not keeping as much money back and not looking at a bottom line or a bank balance increase for no reason. And that includes making sure that the board is really risk welcoming, as I quite like to say, making sure that we kind of get into out of our comfort zone, and making sure that we're doing as much as we can for the organisation. And I think from the staff member perspective, I think that clarity is really, really important, of kind of understanding how and why decisions are made really, really helps to understanding if something is, you know, perhaps been rejected or a formal proposal is not been accepted. Then knowing the reasons why and the discussions that took place is so important for us to understand exactly what we can do better or how we can change our tactics to make sure that the next time it's successful, or do something completely different, and having that open discussion is useful too. If I can just add a final point as well, I think one of the other measures basis that has really helped more recently is having away days with staff and doing things like we did a speed dating with staff, so that we could actually have like one-to-one conversations with staff members, so that they can ask us anything, like what our favorite food is, where we went to school, or, you know, anything that they wanted to ask about us as individuals. And I think that helped to demystify a little bit about who we are as individuals, and that we're not this scary group of people who have all the responsibility of an organization and that they can't talk to us at all. I think that went a long way to really getting the staff to understand, like Sarah said, about the importance and the value that the board can bring, but also that we're there ultimately to serve the staff body and to serve the needs of the organisation.
Thank you very much. So that connection piece being really important. I read something recently about how we should perhaps view the board and the staff. There's 3 teams there. One is the staff and the board together. One is the staff and one is the board. So you do that kind of team connection piece that you would with any team is really important. And that risk appetite, I don't know whether you just want to explain a bit more about just a little bit about risk appetite for those who might not be aware of what that covers.
Sure. So I think what I mean by that is that there are always going to be questions asked of the board that are going to make us feel uncomfortable. It might mean, you know, spending money or investing that maybe we're going to have to dip into reserves for, or, you know, it might be communications, for example, can be quite risky sometimes. And I think being able to have a conversation and getting the board comfortable about how risk welcoming they feel really, really that, for example, the roles of people on the board are really vital with that too. So, you know, how the treasurer interacts with the rest of the organisation and the finance team might really impact the decisions that are made as part of the board and the staff body too. And I think that at base, we try to kind of look at things in the round. You know, we have the kind of overview from the CEO and the treasurer of, like, you know, this is what's needed. We need to invest in a post. The treasurer would also be able to give her overview of whether or not it's actually affordable, but also actually, if it's not quite affordable, what else could we do, and where can we meet in the middle and be able to kind of make a change? And I think that's vital too.
A really good example. Thank you. Sarah or Greg, do you have anything to add to this question? Please feel just free to unmute.
Yeah, just quite quickly. One of the early indicators I've noticed is when staff start asking not to come to the meetings. And that's quite often because there's staff aren't safe in the meeting. So if it's not someone who comes regularly, when they rock up, they can have this experience of trustees feeling like they're going for them. And sometimes that is true, that they cross-question them, just as they would cross-question me as chief executive, where actually that they perhaps need to think about being more supportive. And this the line management kind of needs to make sure that that's prepared for, so the director or the CEO, that they've prepared the board for those appropriate behaviours. And then the other thing that is when the board are getting a bit bored, B-O-R-E-D, with kind of what's coming, and which quite can happen when the environment is, the only things coming forwards are we are telling you and you are going to nod, rather than having the discussion. And if that's happening after a fashion, that the dynamic with the board can become really, really challenging, and staff can become quite defensive because they're putting their heart and soul into this. And I think that's something else I've been learning, is that everyone who comes from the staff team is really passionate about what they're doing. That's kind of what our sector's like. But again, we're not involving people and talking and drawing in their skills and perspectives. It just can be so difficult, and so that breakdown in interest causes problems. Otherwise, I nod and echo to everything that Kieran, Sarah, and Carla have been saying. Really valid.
I come across so many staff that come out of their first trustee meeting feeling deflated and describing it as pretty adversarial. You know, if you think of the dynamic of 9 or 10 people almost against one is how it can feel. So I think that supportive element is so important, isn't it? Thank you so much. Graham, over to you, last but not least.
I've not got a huge amount to add, because I think there's some great advice there. I guess a couple of bits. Firstly, I love the description, by the way, of 3 teams. Fran, I've got in my head, I've got an image of a flip chart with a Venn diagram on about responsibilities and shared work. So I think that's great. I think, and again, I've been lucky enough to not be in situations many times where relationships are broken down. But I suppose where I've worked with organisations where it has, I guess the things that I see are an over-reliance on relationships going through the chair or the CEO. And actually, I know there'll be quite a few callers from small charities where relationships are so key. So again, I love that idea of speed networking, or the opportunities for staff to meet trustees, vice versa, and to build that relationship across the organisation, I think is important. I think the stuff only being done through the formal meetings. So again, I think, love Carla's advice that actually it's a warning sign when you see it getting overly formal or about process rather than culture and the people and the relationships. So I think if you're in an environment where everything has to go through a meeting, bring it to the board rather than let's have a conversation about it. I think that's probably a warning sign. And again, when the language is about stepping on toes rather than how do we work together to kind of achieve what we're trying to get done. So I think, and other than that, I'd just be mirroring what the other panel members have said, really. I think there's some good advice.
Wonderful. So I think we'll just do a brief reflection on the last question. So we've still got some time to go for the audience questions. So I just wondered if anybody wanted to share an example of where there's been a bit of a problem that's been brewing and how you have kind of brought it back from the brink. Perhaps just a couple of examples. I don't know if any of you would like to start.
Fran, just before we move to the next question, I just had a couple of extra points, if you don't mind. And I really recognise how much space I'm taking up in the meeting. I'll be quick. One of them was about hierarchy and gatekeeping. So the idea that a board has to be a traditional patriarchal hierarchy isn't necessary at all. And just because the Charity Commission says that there should be a chair of a board and there should be a number of trustees that look to that board doesn't mean that it has to be that way. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do at Basis is to look at how we can kind of have a bit more of a matrix, and that relationship doesn't just go between the CEO and the chair and then downwards. I think it's really traditional and it's not necessary. And the other thing is about gatekeeping the board meetings. And I think so often I've worked in organisations where only certain individuals get to go to a board meeting. It doesn't have to be that way at all. And I think that one of the things at Basis we've changed really recently is just saying, if you want to come along. It might be very dull and it might be very boring for you, but also if you want to just see it as a development opportunity, feel free to attend. And we have meetings on Zoom, so there's no reason why people can't come along, as kind of just to find out what we discuss and kind of how things work. So that's been helpful too. Thank you.
It sounds like those are great ways of reducing the power differential and kind of doing some demystifying and building those bonds. So thank you. So yes, just a couple of examples would be brilliant. We've talked about all the kind of messy stuff. How have you perhaps helped bring a situation back from it becoming, I know we had a couple of examples previously.
Yeah, Fran, I was going to say, like, picking up on a lot of the ones that I've said before. Sarah Gosling's point about, being willing to kind of eat humble pie. And I think maybe it was Sarah Martin that was talking about, the power of actually just just apologizing or reflecting. I think one of the things that I think I'm quite often, a lot of the time in these kinds of situations, I do end up advising the board where relationships are broken down, rather than advising the staff or senior staff, although it's not always that case. But I think a lot of the time what I'm saying is like, stop. You need to not make it personal. This isn't an attack on you as an individual. And I think where I see sometimes things, getting to a point, if we're talking about bringing it back from a brink and not going over the brink, it's when you stop seeing it as, why are they so horrible to me? I'm a volunteer. I'm giving my time. I'm just trying to do the right thing. And why are they all ganging up on me? Why aren't they happy? Why are they accusing me of things? And it's like, no, the staff aren't, most likely, I mean, there are some cases where it is a bit of a bad relationship, but in most cases, that's not what's going on.
No.
All the things we've been talking about, they're just trying to do their job, feel really passionate about something. They're trying to challenge something or ask a question, probably because they don't understand why something's being done, or because you as the board might not have thought about something really important that the staff understand. They're there day in, day out. So I think a lot of it is, don't take it personally. Remember the structure that you're in. Remember that you're all there for the, to further the purposes of the charity. That's what your goal is. That's what you're aiming at. So just try and kind of bring it back from that brink of kind of feeling like you're under attack personally, and think about it much more in that kind of, in that sphere.
That's excellent advice. And I love the point somebody's made in the chat relating to the last question. Susan Hall, she's written, I think the inviting staff to attend a board meeting works the other way too. I certainly welcomed the opportunity to attend a staff meeting as a new trustee and learnt a lot from doing so. So thanks for that comment. Anybody else? Maybe one more example about a successful end outcome. Sarah. Oh, Graham, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say briefly about, I suppose, external intervention, because I think there is a reality that sometimes when it reaches the point where there has been a breakdown in the relationship. I mean, full disclosure here, I'm a consultant, right, who's talking about external intervention, whether that's a consultant, whether it's somebody, from another organization or whether it's a qualified mediator. But I think sometimes it reaches the point where actually the only path forward, or the only way forward, is by inviting somebody to come and help. If it's fundamentally about the relationship, somebody who can bring an objective viewpoint, who can help people involved return to principles, get back to the point about, right, let's talk about why we're here, let's talk about our shared purpose, and let's agree some ways of working that are really going to kind of help resolve this. And I think being able and willing to ask for some help in that, when you realize it's reached a point where actually, do you know what, our language isn't helpful, the way we're working together isn't helpful, we need some support in working through that and bringing in somebody to help. That was my other kind of
I think that's an excellent point. Trustees aren't expected to be experts in everything, are they? And part of that continual learning process should be to be able to reach out to the specialists when you need it. So thank you. I'm thinking, Penny, although I'm sure there's a lot more examples we could share, that it might be a good time to see if there's anything in the chat, any questions you'd like to highlight, Penny.
I mean, I think Doric and Colette's questions kind of come together. They're very similar. So Doric says, could the panel give their point of view about whether trustee staff communications outside of board meetings should always be funneled through the CEO? And Colette says, what does it look like on a practical level to have a board without the hierarchy? I feel like that's a kind of a pair of questions.
Wonderful. Who'd like to share their thoughts on that?
I'll just comment on the channeling things through the CEO. I think it depends what it is. One of the things, when I've been working as a consultant, I often interview the senior staff team as well as the board when we're doing a board review. And so many times the senior staff will say, we've got so-and-so on the board who's got skills that are relevant to me, but they never talk to me. And some of that is because they've never made that approach outwards, because they felt that that's not possible. And I've encouraged them just to say, well, ask. And at the moment, if you feel that needs to go through the CEO and the CEO will make that ask into the board, then that is the route to make it. But the chances are every trustee is going to offer their time and their skills. Most people love sharing that experience. Opening up those conversations is really good. I must admit, one of the ways I found easiest to get around it is connecting on LinkedIn. And I know that's a bit silly, but you can then have those odd little conversations which aren't undermining things, but it's an easier place to kind of draw on people's skills and getting those informal discussions going. The only time I would say is if there's a big decision going on, then you shouldn't be undermining the decision-making processes within the organisation. And Graham talking about getting involved externally, one of the times I get involved most is where a decision's been made by the board and then staff are going around and underneath it, or trustees are going into the organisation and bypassing the cascade lines of information and authority, and particularly around staffing changes. And I think you just need to be really, really careful about the building relationship, help the charity succeed, and those decision-making structures and how they should be communicated down. And you shouldn't be going outside the structures to communicate something. That should sit with those people who've been clearly given that authority. Maybe it's the chair who's going to go into a meeting with staff, maybe it's the senior leaders who are going to have conversations. And they're not all bad conversations. It could be fantastic news about funding and things, but don't kind of go around some of those structures.
Thank you very much. Sarah, Martin. I hope that your hand is up because in relation to this question, yeah? Or did I misread?
I don't think it was.
Okay. Sorry about that.
If I can respond to a question in the chat later, I'll...
Okie doke, that was what it was. Okay, thank you. Anybody else like to comment on that last?
Fran, I've just got a quick point on, I think it was, the comments are coming in now, but I think it was Susan about the other way around and being in staff meeting. I think that's a really important point actually, because through my trustee journey, I've tried to do the same. I've sat in staff meeting on committees within the organizations, and those meetings, and even organizations when they have the board and then the advisory boards as well, or the youth steering board, something else that's not the trustee board. And I think sitting in on those meetings and understanding how essentially how things eventually lead up to the trustee board is really insightful, because then when you're sitting there in those quarterly meetings or whatever, it's not just a case of you've been fed these documents and this information and kind of missed out what's happened on the day to day. You've had opportunities to see how the information got to you in the end. And then when making decisions or coming across issues that might have happened, you have a bit more of a sense of where it could have come from. You still don't obviously have all the answers and all the insight, but it just allows, and I think it also starts to build that element of trust as well. And it really sets the idea of what you mentioned earlier about psychologically safe spaces, because again, it's like when you enter those spaces, it's still a space of trust, and then it happens the other way. So by the time it gets to the board meetings, I think a lot more insight and trust and ability to see things from broader perspectives comes into play. And I think it's really, really useful.
Yeah, I can certainly echo that from my experience of staff members. You know, the trustee board members that they inclined towards were the ones who had taken some time to immerse themselves in the operations. It doesn't have to be to a huge extent, like you said, but showing their faces, showing they're listening to the perspectives and the work of the staff, really important. So thank you very much. Anybody else? I think we've got a few minutes left.
We've got another question, Fran. Would
Fantastic.
You like?
Let's do it.
I think this is a cracker. So Anna says, I'm attending this as a hopefully soon to be CEO of a new small charity. What would your advice be on forming a new board of trustees? We have a blank slate, which is a luxury, but equally, and I guess this isn't from the point of view of recruiting trustees, but from the point of view of setting up the things that are going to ensure effective relationships between Anna and her new colleagues and the board.
So if we can have an answers that are just under a minute, you might all get a chance to answer. Carla, I'm going to pick on you first.
Yeah, I think in terms of
you on the spot there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm just trying to think about what Penny said, like focusing on this from the perspective of a relationships kind of discussion rather than general good practice recruitment kind of thing. I think generally like recruiting for a purpose. So I think understanding why you're asking someone to join the board, and yeah, as we've said, being really clear with them up front why you're asking them to join, and what the kind of expectations will be in terms of, you know, if they join, what are you asking them to do. I think that's going to set just a really good kind of foundation for everyone who's joining, because we can't assume that they will know.
Thank you so much. Graham, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, what a wonderful opportunity. Just to echo, I would be really purposeful about it. So really thinking through what's the kind of culture that we want, what's the approach, what's the tone in terms of the board, and therefore how do we get people in that are going to enable us to deliver that. And I mean, obviously, like as you recruit into that, again, diversity is the key, right? Great boards are made up of different people with different backgrounds, different lived experience, different perspectives, and different skills. So the opportunity to be quite intentional about kind of who you bring into the board and how you've set the tone right from the outset. But good luck with that journey. I think it's a fabulous position to be in.
Thank you. Kieran?
Yeah, just completely echoing that. I think this is an exciting point where you get to intentionally cementing that culture early on, so that when anybody joins and as you grow, whether it's the staff or the trustees, that culture is not only it's not only said, but it's really felt. That's really important. I think this is the stage where that's crucial. And also, again, I know when we start building boards, it's like, you know, someone from this, you know, who has experience in finances, who has experience in this and that. But I think, again, being at this stage means that you get to really emphasize the importance of lived experience with your trustees as well. And you start to really understand that, again, I'm not sure who the charity set up to support, but whoever it is, there will be people who might not be in those usual kind of boxes when we're thinking of who to build, but who have direct lived experience with the community that is being served. So again, just good luck. And this is the exciting part.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sarah. Martin, please.
My laptop just froze for a second, so I'm sorry if I just echo exactly what Kieran just said if I didn't hear it. But my 2 points would really be about consider trustee agreements. So actually having formal in writing what you expect of a new trustee, but also what you're going to give them back in return, i.e. getting papers to them on time so they can make effective decisions and that kind of thing. And don't worry too much about skills audits, because I think people do get really bogged down in trying to find a marketeer, a HR person and a lawyer, but actually having people who are going to be critical friends are going to really challenge you is also really important. The other thing about that is who is going to be helpful in terms of building the brand for the organization, in terms of, you know, like what connections they have and are they going to be willing to share their black books.
Lovely, very important. Thank you. Sarah Gosling, last but not least.
I had the privilege of working with a fairly new charity. When I joined, there were 2 staff and a board that was about halfway through its forming. We had a trustee induction day, and one of the key things we did was we kind of did, but this is the role of the trustee, this is an introduction to YGAM and all of that, its work and its mission. And we then had a session where we went through that agreement. You're to talk about kind of code of conduct, what the expectations are. And the board then had this fantastic conversation about, well, what does that mean for us? How are we going to play it out in this room? If things aren't going to plan in the conversations, how are we going to elicit that discussion that says, oh, hang on a moment, that's not what we agreed, we're going to change directions. And they set this amazing foundation for how they're going to host those conversations. And the CEO really bought into that. And he was a very transparent kind of person and loved those incredibly open conversations, which felt quite unusual. And they then every few months would just take a stop and check about how are we getting on as a board. And they kept taking time to check in. I didn't know this about you. You mentioned that's your experience. So they really invested in board meetings, not every time, but at least a couple of times a year, in just taking time to build that relationship. And they did it online. And online, you don't often get that chance to do that chatting, but they arrived early, just as they would for a board meeting. And while they were drinking coffee, they would have those little chats. And I learned so much. I don't know who came up with that kind of whole
fantastic
concept, but it was amazing.
Thank you so much. Too many brilliant themes to mention all of them, but clear expectations, open communication, diverse and inclusive, and two-way connection and understanding are the kind of themes I've pulled out. Sorry, I haven't left you 2 or 3 minutes, Penny.
I'll speak quickly. Thank you all. That was absolutely brilliant. That felt
Thank you so much.
It felt really practical. Thank you. So thank you to Fran and the 2 Sarahs, Carla, Kieran and Graham. Thank you for your time. Thank you to Russell Cook, who enabled us to put this session on free of charge, which is very important to getting on board in terms of the accessibility of trustee learning. I've put an evaluation form in the chat. We'll also put that in the follow-up email. We'd really love to hear what you thought of this session. There's also a gap in there for your suggestions for other such sessions. So do give us your ideas. That's where we get all of our sessions from. They're all crowdsourced. This is a session that's part of our trustee learning programme. It's all 1-hour introductory sessions for and about trustees. I've also put a link to that in the chat and it will be in your follow-up email. So do please have a look what we've got coming up. We've got transitions, saying goodbye to your CEO. We've got finance for trustees. We've got board diversity in lots of different sorts. We've got so you want to set up a charity, and we've got Carla coming back to talk about employing your first member of charity staff. Anna, I'm thinking about you on that one. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you all have a good afternoon.